Lakeland Public Television presents Currents with host Ray Gildow. Sponsored by Nisswa Tax Service, offering tax preparation for individuals and businesses across from the City Hall in Nisswa and on the web at nisswatax.com.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Lakeland Currents, where this evening we're going to be talking about economic development, a topic that's very important to every community, probably more so in rural Minnesota to our smaller communities than some of the bigger cities. But it's a topic that's very timely, and my guests are very dedicated to the economic development, in this case, of the Brainerd Lakes area. But I think the things that we're going to be talking about this evening can be shared across the spectrum of the rural Minnesota. I'd like to introduce Sheila Haverkamp, who is the second director of the Brainerd Lakes Area Economic Development Corporation. And you have how many years now, you said, Sheila?
More than 25 years.
25 years. And to her right is Paul Means, who is president of one of our local banks in Brainerd.
That's correct. It's called Riverwood Bank.
Riverwood Bank. And to his right is Kevin Egan, who comes from Chicago.
I'm from Chicago originally. That is correct.
Right. And before we get into what Bladek is, maybe we could just talk a little bit about your backgrounds and give some people an understanding of what it is that you do. And Sheila, you have a tough job. I think the two toughest jobs in rural communities are chamber directors and economic development corporation people, or economic developers. And I say that because there's big turnover, high expectations, sometimes high criticism because not enough is happening,
Right.
or there's too much government money or grant money being spent.
Yeah.
So it's not an easy job, and I think it's good for people to understand that when you've been in that position a long time, you've done a pretty good job, or you wouldn't still be there.
Well, thank you.
And I know you have a grandfather who was in the NHL.
That's
Yeah, I do.
Yes.
Nick Wasney.
And what was the teams he played for?
Oh, Montreal Canadiens, Chicago Blackhawks, as well as many others.
But not the Minnesota teams,
He didn't.
unfortunately.
Yes.
But 25 years in this role, and how big of an operation do you have? How big is your staff?
So Bladek has 3 professional staff members, myself, Chris, and Megan Rabine. So 3 individuals working throughout Crow Wing County to try to encourage business growth. But we have a wonderful staff of what I refer to as our volunteers, volunteer board of directors, business leaders, individuals such as Kevin, who are giving back to help making our community the very best it can be.
So your focus is primarily Crow Wing County.
It is.
Do you ever work with economic development coordinators in other counties? Do you ever share expertise?
We do.
Do you have a network?
We do. In fact, we have a local regional network within the 5 counties here in central Minnesota, but also on a state level. There's the Economic Development Association of Minnesota. The state of Minnesota has a department dedicated just for economic development work. And so, we're definitely a small group working throughout the entire state and get to know each other and support each other and try to bring economic prosperity to our individual communities, but also to the state as a whole.
So maybe we could come back and talk a little bit about that before we close the program today, for people who might be interested to learn more about that.
That'd be wonderful.
Paul, what's your background?
Well, I grew up in Iowa originally, and I moved to Brainerd about 20 years ago, and been a community banker pretty much since I got out of college, which is upwards of almost 40 years now. So it's been a long time. And 20 years ago when I decided I wanted to move to Brainerd, I knew a lot about the Brainerd area, and knew that it had grown, up to that point in time, and knew that it would grow for the next 20 years just because of, I guess, the natural amenities that the area has to offer. And so it's 20 years later, and in the last 5 years I've gotten very involved with Bladek, been on the board for 5 years and been the president for the last 2 years. And so when as a business person, I know a lot about what goes on behind the scenes now with Bladek, and realize that the area has a lot to offer. And so in my mind, it's a good place to live. It's a good place to have a business. It's a good place to be involved. There's a lot of things going on in the community, and the outlook is good too with that. I mean, you look at the next 20 years of what's going to happen in this area, it's pretty exciting. I mean, we've went through a downturn, a few years back, but everybody's kind of come out of that, and so the outlook is looking better and better. So that's what brought me to Brainerd.
Now, is your position an elected position by the board, or how do you become the president of Bladek?
Well, first of all, you got to be willing. After you're asked, you have to be willing to do it, and then certainly at the board level, they make a recommendation to its membership. and then the membership actually formally votes on that. So,
And Kevin, your background, I know, having talked to you in the past, you've got a fair amount of experience in the healthcare field.
I did a lot of legal work defending healthcare organizations in the fraud and abuse settings and things like that. Earlier in my career, Ray, I was a federal prosecutor, and I parlayed that into serving as a partner for a very large law firm for years. And the practice eventually evolved into working almost exclusively with healthcare organizations that found themselves in trouble with the feds.
Oh, really? Like what would be some examples of the?
Oh, there are a lot of arcane rules. If you overpay a doctor for doing certain tests, these are criminal statutes, and people can go to jail, the doctors, the hospital executives. That's why they might be willing to put me on an airplane from Chicago and go talk to someone in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, who has that kind of problem.
Okay.
When we created the Medicare program, we basically turned the federal checkbook over to the hospitals and the doctors. And the industry has learned how to use and manipulate that perhaps ever since.
And how long have you been on the Blade Act?
I've been on Blade Act. Kathy Galswick recommended that I come and talk to Sheila probably 4 years ago. And I didn't know Blade Act, excuse me, I'd been involved in economic development. I was an elected official down in Illinois. So I knew broadly how important it was, but I sure didn't know Blade Act or Sheila or Paul. I sat in and probably 4 years ago became involved, and then, depending on interests and time and skill sets, Sheila and Paul find work for you, is what it amounts to. And none of us get paid, of course, except for Sheila for what we do.
And so one of the things I'm sure that is a challenge for this organization is developing the trust from the small business. I know if you have a small business, a family business, maybe you're in some kind of trouble and you need the help of this organization. It's not just everybody that's willing to put the books on the table and say, here's what's happening to us, because there's always concern that that's going to get around the community. So you have to develop that trust and have that integrity in your organization in order to be successful, which
Yes.
Blade Act, I think, has been very successful over the years in doing that. What caused this organization to be formed in the first place?
So in the mid-'80s, there was a group of business leaders who felt like they needed to be more progressive in promoting and marketing our area, as well as rolling up our sleeves and really working with the individual companies as well as entrepreneurs who wanted to either start companies or expand here. And so we were formed in large part by the support of the local units of government, as well as the private sector businesses coming together and creating this public-private partnership. And that still exists today, where we're a public-private funded entity, although we are a nonprofit 501c3. And so we are able to work confidentially, and then that helps that trust factor that you were just referring to, that companies start to understand that we're really there to try to help them succeed, because then our goals of economic prosperity are achieved.
You say you're a combination of public and private funding. What are those funding areas?
So the public sector is the local units of government, Crow Wing County, our cities, Brainerd, Baxter, Nisswa, Pequot, the Cuyuna Range communities. Together, they pool funds through contractual services with the organization to provide economic development work. And then we have business members, similar to a Chamber of Commerce, where individual companies say, I believe in what they're trying to accomplish. If they can be successful, then ultimately we will net significant gains in our work here in the community. So we have an annual membership.
So you have a staff of 3 people.
Correct.
And you have a board. And how big is your board?
A 9-member board of directors.
And then do you have volunteers besides that board that work with you?
We do, we do.
And what do those folks do?
So like for instance, what Kevin Egan here with us today, we have identified for a long time that we have this asset in our community with retired or semi-retired individuals who either retire from our own community or move to the lakes area to enjoy the quality of life, the amenities that we have. And how do we tap into their expertise and their insights and guidance? So we formed about 5 years ago this exec program, which is a group of volunteers that want to give back to the community, offer their talents to our local companies, as well as reach out to their networks to promote the business opportunities that exist here in the Lakes area.
So is that similar to SCORE, the federal program where they're retired execs that come in and help people?
It is.
Do you work with that? Do you
We
cross
do,
paths?
yes. We do. The Senior Corps of Retired Execs under SBA is definitely similar to our exec program. Our exec program is what I would consider much more expanded. So we offer the execs that engage, the opportunity to start to understand our community in greater depth, to meet with the companies, get tours of the different amenities that they might not ever know about. And then it turns into programs such as mentoring and counseling, which might be a BLADEC exec, it might be a SCORE volunteer. But then we've also created programs such as the Rent-A-Board and mentoring and counseling business chats.
When you say Rent-A-Board, you're talking about a board of people, obviously.
Right, so businesses that, businesses that might be ready at some point.
Need to take a drink of water.
I do. Maybe Kevin will
Let me
stand up.
talk for a
Carry on
second.
that
Ray, while-
with it. Give her a
while
little
Sheila
break.
recovers. The structure of BLADEC engenders trust. You talked a second ago about if I'm a company thinking about a Rent-A-Board, having 3 or 4 senior folks come on in and help me with what I have in the way of problems a lot of times. Do I feel comfortable in opening my books and sharing what might be a 3-generation family business with 2 or 3 or 4 people from the outside, literally? The structure here is not tied to local government. It's not really tied to the Chamber of Commerce. Instead, as Sheila noted, it's just a 501c3. It's an independent corporate entity dedicated to creating economic success for the entire region. And our goal as members of the Senior Executive Corps are to go ahead and take the deep resources that are here from people willing to go ahead and share those resources with others. And I'm amazed at how many good and willing and giving people we've found as we have asked. It amazes me, and what we've succeeded in doing is going ahead and linking those skill sets with business enterprises that need those skills, that need those help. We talked a bit about the Rent-A-Board. Most legal entities are board-driven in the end. They're corporate entities. Yet if they're a family-owned business, there perhaps is not a lot of outside pollination of ideas, and perhaps the ability to deal with problems is not as expansive as it might be if you look to the outside a bit. That's where a concept like the Rent-A-Board comes in. If there's trust, company shares back and forth with people willing to serve in effect as board members for a year with that fiduciary duty, that obligation which exists. It works well.
So you can bring in expertise that a lot of these smaller companies just could not afford.
They don't have, and even if they're big companies, there are a lot of family-owned businesses, 2- and 3-generation businesses, that don't have perhaps the depth of experience and the depth of background needed to survive and thrive in today's world.
Paul, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just maybe going to add to some of the things that Sheila's already said and some of the questions you asked of her. Confidentiality is obviously a key component of local economic development, because once you've reached that, you just develop the reputation that you're not confidential. Well, we have just the opposite reputation, I think, in BLADEC, and it kind of stems from the top, and the culture is, it's very, very important that confidentiality remains a critical thing that we all are aware of, and it's important for the new board members and the people that represent the public sector that participate in our meetings, that they understand how critical that issue is. And so with Sheila's leadership, that's always been something that's, BLADEC has a great reputation for being a very confidential organization to deal with. So a lot of things happen behind the scenes, and all of a sudden you find out something's happened. Well, Sheila's probably known about that for several months, because she's been working hand in hand with them, and on occasion she shares that information with board members, but obviously it doesn't get out, and rightfully so. The other thing I was going to maybe just follow up on, you had talked about funding and the challenges of getting funding from the public sector, and how that has changed over the years. And when they first started Bladex several years ago, there was a group of local business people that really kind of got the company going, or the Bladex organization going. I mean, they wrote their own checks out and they volunteered, you know, and then they got the public sector to help support it. And over the years, you know, that's changed somewhat, especially in the last few years when some of the, you know, the public, you know, we went through the downturn and the public sector side of funding started to they had to cut back. And so the resources that were coming to Bladex were becoming less and less from that group of funding. And so that, you know, with that, we emphasized it more on the private sector side and reached out to more and more people locally and increased our local memberships to replace the funding that we lost in the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of always an ongoing challenge, and I'm amazed at how much time that Sheila spends with dealing with all these various entities that she talked about, to have to, you know, basically it gets down to, you know, what have you done for me lately? And
Right.
fortunately, we have a very seasoned executive director who's very well respected, not only locally but regionally. And so I think that helps Bladex be a very effective organization.
And I can imagine there are some companies who probably never want people to know that they've worked with people getting the
Correct.
help.
Very true.
So you can never share the success that some of the companies have had. I grew up here, and I can remember at one time the paper mill and Northern Pacific were the major employers here. And I never dreamed that the paper mill would close. I don't know, there were 600-700 people that worked there at one point in time, back when it was Northwest Paper Company. And I was amazed just to look at this area, and obviously the younger families that were impacted, a lot of people were impacted because it was a very good paying job.
Yeah.
But I'm amazed at how diverse the area has become. And it's like the community didn't really miss a beat when the paper mill closed. And when the shops closed, there were a lot of assimilation going on. There's a lot more manufacturing, and I know one of your success stories is Lakeland Mold,
Yes.
which I have some experience with too when I was involved with the college. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your involvement with Lakeland Mold, because I know they're proud of that relationship.
Yes. Dan and Pat Schulist, who started Lakeland Mold Company, had a second home on one of our beautiful lakes. And they really wanted to be able to live here and work here year-round. And so they started a business planning effort with the local resources that are available. And we're actually able to start in some existing space and eventually grow the company to a significant employer in our area. The company is currently in Brainerd's Industrial Park, new ownership now, and a brand new facility is under construction to take this company to a whole new level. And so that entrepreneurial opportunity, you have to seize it, you have to embrace it, you have to support them, and then hopefully as the years go on, you will see significant economic benefits. And I think when you talk about the paper mill closing, and that was devastating for the community, like you said, several individuals and families were impacted. We were fortunate in our area that the construction sector, especially around the lakes and the seasonal homes, was going quite strong. And so that construction sector was able to help offset the economic impact that you might have seen otherwise. And then as a result of Bladex and the amenities and the quality of life here in the lakes area, we really have been able to diversify that economic base. We're hopeful that the physical structure of that paper plant will again see renewed opportunities in manufacturing companies starting up. We got two small companies that are now in that large 600,000 square foot footprint, and we're hoping for more. It's under new ownership, and the new owner has a vision of that facility being multi-tenant with significant economic activity and companies and jobs, again, for our area.
Does the current owner have anything to do with paper anymore, or is it something totally different?
Totally different.
Okay.
The paper industry here in the Brainerd Lakes area will not return.
As it's left a lot of communities.
Correct.
The Little Falls and,
Yep.
and to the north of us too.
Correct.
So there's a possibility for new growth for new businesses in that building.
New manufacturing opportunities as well as warehousing and processing. Yes.
And you've got some of the other opportunities that you wanted to talk about, some of the other opportunities that the Lakes area right now is presenting. What are some of those?
So we love to share not only about our infrastructure, whether it be the fiber communications, our industrial parks, our existing facilities, but we also like to talk about the people and the talent that we have here. We have a community college that works hand in hand with the business community and the economic development organization to make sure that we are generating and growing industry expertise for the companies that are located here. And we got shovel-ready site certification. We got financing programs that we can assemble and package to meet business needs. We feel here in the Lakes area that we're ready to support business growth and help them to succeed and benefit the market.
I like to say that we're in the right place at the right time. It's the state of Minnesota was recently ranked as the #1 business state in the country. And then with that, being in Minnesota and being 2 hours from Minneapolis, we get the benefits of what happens in Minneapolis, and obviously a lot of the recognition that we get for the state evolves from what happens in Minneapolis. But being 2 hours away and having the lakes and all the natural amenities that go with that, hunting and fishing and things like that, we are kind of a weekend playground for a lot of the people from the Minneapolis market. And so, just by the nature of that, there's a real draw of people into our area. Obviously, a high influx of people in the summer months. And one of the statistics that I've come across recently is called retail sales per capita. And the average retail sales per capita in the state of Minnesota is like 15,000, which is pretty much average for across the country. But in Crow Wing County, it's like 20,000 per person per capita, and in Baxter, it's 80,000 per capita. So it's just it's a phenomenal number, and you can tell that more and more people are gravitating to us as a regional center, and in terms of overall economic development, it's helping to support all these other projects that Sheila is actively involved in and trying to grow workforce and the tech sector and things like that.
So as a board, do you have to prioritize where you're spending your energies?
Yeah, I mean, we have like target industries. We have like 5 different areas, and tech sector, manufacturing, healthcare, energy, and tourism would be the target industries. But within that, it's like, there's a lot of opportunities in all those various industries, and which ones have the biggest impact today and the most potential. Fortunately, in manufacturing, many of our local manufacturers are doing very, very well today. They're not dependent on foreign sales, so the increasing dollar hasn't really had a huge impact on their growth. And so that's helped to create more job opportunities, and the unemployment rate is coming down. In fact, we're getting to the point now where many of those manufacturers want to grow, and they're having a hard time finding people. So we went from a few years back during the downturn where we had a high unemployment rate and nobody was really expanding to we have people that have a hard time finding employees so that they can grow their businesses. So that's always an ongoing challenge, but those are things we work on.
It really is. I just recently, Under Armour, producer of everything that everybody wears,
Yep.
has announced that they're going to invest in factories in America and move away from all of their production offshore. Not all of it, but they believe that needs to be a reinvestment back into manufacturing in this country. And manufacturing was a huge employment driver for us until we had the big recession that hit. And actually a couple of years before that, we started seeing a lot of things going offshore from a lot of the big companies. So it's really nice to see that. I know that's one of your priorities, and you don't have the turnover in manufacturing, obviously, that you do in the retail sector.
Right.
The retail sector's very high turnover, restaurant businesses, very high turnover. Do you have people then in your organization that have those backgrounds in manufacturing that can really hit the road running, that are on your board?
Let me go ahead and deal with that. The answer is yes. We have a broad base of qualified, senior, well-seasoned folks. And if someone comes to us, there will be a distinct likelihood, Ray, that we have someone who has dealt with this area or the other area that you may need some help in. But the secret is we need to get those folks that need help in the door. They have to go ahead and pick up the phone and chat with Sheila or call Paul or call me. We'll do what we can to go ahead and provide that kind of assistance, but they've got to call first.
Because you're not going to go out and put pressure on people.
No,
to work with you.
of
It's
course not. Nope.
Strictly an opportunity that's there for people who want to take advantage of it.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of Ray, Minnesota?
I have not.
Well, there is a town in Minnesota. So I just wanted you to know that.
No.
And
Ray, Minnesota.
I just, before we close, I just wanted to say, if there are these small communities and,
Yes.
and they need some help,
Yes.
not that you would have to be the people that help them, but what are processes that they need to go through to try to get somebody to help them?
You know, I think it starts with a grassroots effort of local leaders that want to, positively impact their community, come together and start reaching out to all the network and resources at a regional and state level that exist, because they're definitely there.
There are people out there to help, aren't there?
There are.
And I know a lot of real small communities think that there's no opportunities maybe to get a manufacturer into their area, but that isn't always the case.
Not at all.
And as you said, Lakeland Mold started with people who came to the lakes area. And by the way, there are a lot of communities in our area that have lakes that have not done as well as the Brainerd area.
Yes.
It isn't just because of lakes. It's, I think, because you have a strategy to how to get people here to do that sort of thing. So in the last 30 seconds, how do we get a hold of you folks if we want to talk to you?
So growbrainerdlakes.org.
growbrainerdlakes.org.
Correct.
That's your website?
That's our website.
And from there you can get any information you need?
You got it.
Well, great.
Yes.
Thank you folks for jumping on the show with us. I think you're doing good work, and grow.
There you go.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
You've been watching Lakeland Currents, where we're talking about what you're talking about. I'm Ray Gildow. So long until next time.